Hi, I'm Emma, 27 years old, and I married the love of my life, Ryan, 3 years ago. From the moment I met him, I knew he was different, kind, patient, and always ready to make me laugh. We're polar opposites in many ways, but we balance each other out beautifully. Unfortunately, our relationship comes with one significant hurdle: his mother, Maria. Maria is complicated, to say the least. From our very first meeting, she made her feelings about me painfully clear. She's one of those people who can disguise barbed insults as helpful advice. Her comments would sound innocuous to an outsider, but they always struck me as carefully crafted to undermine me. Despite her thinly veiled hostility, I've tried to keep the peace, mostly for Ryan's sake. He loves his mom, and I didn't want to create tension between them. But it hasn't been easy. The first time we met was during a dinner at Ryan's family home. I remember walking in, a little nervous but hopeful, eager to make a good impression. Maria greeted me with a scrutinizing look before offering a curt, "Jenny, isn't it?" When I corrected her with a polite smile, "Actually, it's Emma," she shrugged and said, "Oh, well, Jenny suits you better." It was an awkward dinner, to say the least. She didn't outright attack me, but managed to slip in comments about my appearance, my job, and even my table manners. Every word felt calculated to chip away at my confidence. Ryan noticed and tried to redirect the conversation, but Maria had already made her mark. After dinner, Ryan apologized profusely, promising he'd talk to her. "She'll come around," he assured me. I wanted to believe him. Maria didn't come around. Over the next couple of years, her subtle jabs became a regular part of my life. She'd comment on my weight, suggest better ways to style my hair, and criticize my cooking whenever Ryan and I hosted family dinners. "Oh, honey, this casserole is different," she'd say, wrinkling her nose. "Ryan always loved my recipes. Maybe I should teach you sometime." Despite her relentless criticism, I did my best to stay civil. I bit my tongue and plastered on a smile, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. Ryan's father, Kyle, was a kind man who often tried to mediate, but even he couldn't completely rein in Maria. Their son, Jack, was another story. Jack had always been Maria's golden boy, and while he was nice enough to me, it was clear where his loyalty lay. The real turning point came on our wedding day. Maria was a nightmare. She arrived late, complained about the venue, and criticized every little detail. At one point, she even tried to convince the hairstylist to change my look to something more traditional, which of course resembled her own wedding hairstyle. When I refused, she huffed and muttered something about how brides should look their best, not like they're trying too hard. Ryan was livid. He confronted her during the reception, but Maria played the victim, claiming she was only trying to help. It was a frustrating day, but I told myself it was worth it because I got to marry the man I love. Fast forward 3 years, and not much had changed. Maria's behavior remained a constant source of tension, but no matter how hard she tried to drive a wedge between us, Ryan and I stood strong. We had our routines, our little bubble of happiness, and we were determined not to let her ruin it. Still, her antics were exhausting, and I found myself dreading family gatherings more and more. One Sunday evening, we were invited to dinner at Maria and Kyle's house. It was a family tradition we tried to keep, even though it often left me emotionally drained. This time, Maria insisted it was a special occasion and that everyone had to be there. Jack was invited too, which was unusual since he rarely joined us for these dinners. As we sat around the table, Maria stood up, tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. "I have an announcement," she declared, holding up a piece of paper. "Since my birthday is coming up, I've decided to plan a family trip to Hawaii." The room erupted in cheers. Kyle smiled warmly, and even Jack looked excited. I couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement myself. Hawaii had always been a dream destination for me, and the idea of a family trip, despite Maria's presence, sounded wonderful. Maria's voice cut through the chatter. "Oh, but Emma, you won't be joining us." Silence fell. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" Maria gave me a tight-lipped smile. "I made some last-minute changes to the guest list. I didn't think it was appropriate for you to come." Ryan's head snapped up. "What are you talking about, Mom? Emma's part of the family." "Not by blood," Maria replied, her tone icy. "I just want to spend time with the people who matter most to me." Her words hit like a slap. I felt the blood drain from my face as the room erupted into chaos. Ryan and Kyle were both furious, while Jack sat awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Maria, however, remained calm, sipping her wine as if she hadn't just dropped a bombshell. In that moment, I realized something. No matter what I did, Maria would never see me as part of the family. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. 3 years had passed since Hugo and I got married, but Maria's antics remained a constant shadow over our lives. Despite the tension, I tried to maintain civility for Hugo's sake. He loved his family deeply, even if his mother's behavior often left him frustrated. It was a delicate balance, and I didn't want to make him feel torn between his mother and me. But as the saying goes, even the most patient river can erode a stone with time. One Sunday evening, we were invited to dinner at Maria and Kyle's house. These gatherings were frequent, a ritual of sorts, but this one felt different. Maria had been unusually warm when she called Hugo to extend the invitation, even mentioning that she had something important to announce. Suspicious as always, I tucked my reservations aside and decided to attend. Hugo's older brother Jack was also joining us, which only added to the weight of the occasion. As we entered the house, Maria greeted us with her usual saccharine smile. "Jenny, you look well-rested," she said, her tone just shy of genuine. I knew better than to read too much into her words. "Thank you, Maria," I replied, my voice polite but distant. Hugo gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent reminder that he had my back. Dinner began uneventfully. Maria had prepared an elaborate spread, and conversation flowed easily between Kyle, Hugo, and Jack. I mostly listened, occasionally chiming in when addressed. Maria, however, seemed distracted, her eyes darting between us as though gauging our reactions to some unspoken plan. Midway through the meal, she cleared her throat dramatically, drawing everyone's attention. "Everyone," she began, unfolding a piece of paper. "I have an announcement." The table fell silent. Maria's theatrics were nothing new, but the formality of her tone was unusual. She held up the paper like a decree, her face glowing with self-importance. "Since my birthday is coming up," she continued, "I've decided to do something special. We're going to Hawaii." Excited murmurs erupted around the table. I couldn't help but smile. A family trip to Hawaii sounded incredible, a rare opportunity to bond despite Maria's usual behavior. "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "Thank you for including me." Maria's smile faltered, replaced by a smug expression that set off alarms in my head. "Oh, Jenny," she said, her tone syrupy and condescending. "About that, you're not coming." The room froze. Hugo's fork clattered against his plate as he turned to her, disbelief written across his face. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Maria sighed dramatically, as if she were the victim. "I had to make some last-minute changes to the guest list. It was a tough decision, but I canceled Jenny's ticket." "You what?" Hugo's voice rose, his usual calm shattered. "Why would you do that?" Maria's smile didn't waver. "I'm just trying to be honest. Jenny isn't family, not by blood at least, and as I get older, I've realized how important it is to spend my remaining years with those who truly matter." My heart sank. I had endured years of her subtle digs and passive-aggressive comments, but this was a new low. Excluding me from a family trip and framing it as some sort of noble decision was a blatant slap in the face. "That's ridiculous," Hugo snapped. "Jenny is family. She's my wife. If she's not going, then I'm not going either." "Don't be dramatic, Hugo," Maria replied, her tone icy. "Jack's coming, and he's not related to me by blood either." "But he's different. He's been part of this family for years. Jenny just doesn't fit." The room erupted into chaos. Hugo and Kyle argued with Maria while Jack sat in stunned silence. I remained quiet, my mind racing. Maria's disdain for me had always been clear, but this was the first time she had openly admitted it. As the shouting continued, I realized I had a choice. Let her behavior ruin the evening or take control of the narrative. "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. "Maria, I've put up with your disrespect for years. I've tried to be patient and understanding, but this is too much. If you don't want me in Hawaii, fine. I won't go, but let's be clear. I'm not going anywhere. Hugo and I are a team, and no amount of pettiness on your part will change that." Maria's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Hugo reached for my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. I stood, addressing the room. Thank you for dinner, but I think it's time for me to leave. Hugo, stay and work things out with your mother. I'll be fine. Hugo looked torn, but I gave him a small smile. Really, it's okay. I need some air. As I walked toward the door, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Confronting Maria had been liberating, but the weight of her animosity still lingered. Little did I know, the evening's drama was far from over. The night after Maria's announcement was a haze of disbelief and quiet frustration. Hugo tried to calm me, saying, "Don't let her ruin us. She's always been this way. She'll calm down." But I couldn't shake the sting of being excluded so publicly. It wasn't just the trip, it was the principle. Maria's refusal to accept me as family had reached a breaking point. The following morning, I resolved to let it go. I told Hugo to enjoy the trip without me and that I would find peace at home. But fate had other plans. As I was gathering my things to leave their house, I spotted a handwritten letter on the kitchen counter. The name Jack, scrawled at the top, caught my eye, and curiosity got the better of me. The contents of the letter left me cold. In Maria's precise handwriting, it read, "Dearest Jack, you have always been like a son to me, and I'll forever cherish your kindness and loyalty. Honestly, I feel closer to you than I do to my own son, Hugo. Ever since he married that woman, things haven't been the same. She's driven a wedge between us, and I can't see past it anymore. I've decided to update my will. Everything, the house, my savings, even the family business, will go to you. You're the one who's been here for me, and you deserve it. I know this might hurt, Hugo, but I don't care. I hope you'll understand and accept this as my way of showing you how much I value you. With love, your second mom, Maria." My hands shook as I read the words. Maria's disdain for me was one thing, but this, actively trying to cut Hugo out of her will, this wasn't just petty anymore. It was cruel and deliberate. I took a deep breath, folded the letter, and walked back into the dining room where Hugo, Kyle, and Jack were still seated. Their laughter faltered as I approached, my expression serious. "What is it, Jenny?" Hugo asked, concerned. I placed the letter on the table. "I found this in the kitchen. You all need to read it." Kyle's brow furrowed as he picked up the letter. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to anger. He passed it to Jack, who read it with wide eyes, then slid it over to Hugo. "I can't believe this," Hugo muttered, his voice shaking. She's cutting me out of her will? Because of you?" He looked at me, but his anger wasn't directed at me. It was a mix of disbelief and betrayal. Kyle's voice was grave. "This has gone too far. Maria's always been difficult, but this is unforgivable." Jack, usually the peacemaker, was uncharacteristically quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. "I had no idea. I swear I didn't know she felt this way." I believed him. Jack had always been kind to me, and his shock seemed genuine. But that didn't change the fact that Maria's actions were tearing the family apart. "What do we do now?" Hugo asked, looking at his father. "This isn't just about the will. It's about everything. She's been undermining Jenny from the start, and now she's trying to sabotage my relationship with my own family." Kyle sighed deeply. "We confronted her, but we do it together. As a family, she needs to understand that her behavior has consequences." Later that evening, Maria came downstairs, acting as if nothing had happened. Her usual smile faltered when she saw the three of us waiting for her in the living room. Jack held the letter, his expression unreadable. "Maria," Kyle began, his tone steady but firm. "We need to talk." She looked around, confused. "What about?" Jack handed her the letter. "About this." Maria's face paled as she read her own words. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes darting between us. "I can explain." "Please do," Hugo said, his voice cold. "Because I can't wrap my head around how you could do this, how you could betray your own son." Maria's defensiveness flared. "It's not betrayal. I was trying to protect our family. Jenny has poisoned you against me." "No, Mom," Hugo said, his voice rising. "You've done that all on your own. Jenny has been nothing but patient and kind, despite everything you've put her through. This is on you." For the first time, Maria looked genuinely shaken. "I didn't mean for it to come to this," she whispered. "But it has," Kyle said. "And now you need to make things right. Not just with Hugo and Jenny, but with all of us." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but none of us moved to comfort her. She'd crossed too many lines, and it was time for her to face the consequences. That night, Hugo and I packed our bags and left. As we drove home, he reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry for everything she's put you through. I won't let her hurt you anymore." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his support. "We'll get through this, together." But as I stared out the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of Maria's reckoning. After everything that had happened during the dinner, I felt like I was walking through a haze of frustration and disbelief. Hugo had tried to reassure me, promising to have a conversation with his mother and sort things out, but I wasn't convinced Maria would change. Years of her subtle jabs and manipulative behavior couldn't be undone overnight, even if she claimed otherwise. Still, I agreed to give Hugo the space to handle it his way. After all, it wasn't my responsibility to mend their relationship. My focus was on protecting myself and my peace of mind. A few days later, Hugo sat me down to talk. "I spoke to her," he began, running his hands through his hair. "She says she'll apologize for the way she acted at dinner. She's willing to include you in the Hawaii trip." "Willing?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Hugo, it's not about the trip. It's about respect. She can't keep treating me like an outsider and expect me to be okay with it just because she decides to throw me a bone now and then." He sighed. "I know, Jenny. Believe me, I know. But this is the first time she's even hinted at admitting she was wrong. Maybe it's a step in the right direction?" I didn't respond right away. Hugo meant well, and I knew how deeply he loved his family, but I also knew Maria's patterns. An apology wasn't a solution. It was a delay tactic. "Let's see if she actually follows through," I said finally, my tone cautious. When Sunday rolled around, we found ourselves back at Hugo's childhood home for another family dinner. The atmosphere was tense, but deceptively calm, like the surface of a lake hiding a strong undercurrent. Maria greeted us with her usual over-the-top charm, pretending as if the confrontation had never happened. "Jenny, darling," she said, her smile tight and overly sweet. "I want to apologize for my misstep at the last dinner. I didn't mean to upset you." "I appreciate the sentiment," I replied, my words careful. "I hope we can move forward with more understanding and respect." Maria's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, dear. Family is everything, isn't it?" I didn't miss the irony in her statement, but I chose not to engage. The evening dragged on uneventfully, with small talk dominating the conversation. But as we were leaving, something strange happened. While grabbing my purse from the kitchen, I noticed a piece of paper, partially tucked under a cookbook on the counter. The handwriting caught my eye immediately. It was Maria's. Curiosity got the better of me, and I skimmed the first few lines. What I read stopped me cold. "Dearest Jack, you've always been like a son to me, and I love you dearly. The love and care you've shown me over the years will never be forgotten. Even when it comes to Hugo, I feel the bond we once had is no longer there. Since his marriage to Jenny, he's become distant, and honestly, I blame her. Because of this, I've decided to update my will. All my belongings, the house, the cars, the money, will go to you. I know this might hurt Hugo, but I don't care anymore. Jenny has poisoned his mind, and I feel I've lost him forever. I hope you'll understand my decision." My hands shook as I read the rest. It was a full-page letter detailing Maria's intentions to cut Hugo out of her will and transfer everything to Jack. The sheer audacity and malice behind her words were staggering. She wasn't just playing favorites. She was actively plotting to punish her own son for marrying me. I paced the kitchen, my mind racing. Should I confront her now? Wait until Hugo was present? Was this even my place? No, it had to be addressed. Hugo deserved to know. That night, I showed Hugo the letter. At first, he thought I was exaggerating. But as he read it, his face shifted from confusion to shock to fury. "This can't be real," he whispered. She couldn't, but she did," I said softly. "I'm sorry, Hugo. I know this is hard to process, but you need to see her for who she really is." For the first time in our relationship, I saw Hugo's unwavering loyalty to his mother crack. He sat in silence for a long time, the weight of her betrayal sinking in. Finally, he spoke. "She's crossed the line. I'm done making excuses for her." The following week, Hugo and I returned to his parents' house with a plan. Maria greeted us with her usual feigned warmth, but Hugo's cold demeanor immediately put her on edge. "What's wrong, darling?" she asked, her tone dripping with false concern. Hugo didn't mince words. "We found your letter, Mom. The one you wrote to Jack about cutting me out of your will." Maria's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Hugo snapped. "We read every word. How could you do that? How could you even think of something so cruel?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no excuses came. For once, Maria was speechless. At that moment, I realized we were at a turning point. Hugo was finally standing up to his mother, and Maria's manipulations were beginning to crumble. But this was only the beginning of the fallout, and the consequences would be far-reaching. A week passed, and the tension in our household was at an all-time high. Maria hadn't spoken to me since the confrontation, and I was grateful for the reprieve. Hugo, however, was visibly torn. He oscillated between anger at his mother's behavior and worry about the potential fallout. I knew he loved her despite everything, and it pained me to see him caught in the middle. But I also knew we couldn't keep living this way. The day before the Hawaii trip was set to begin, I found myself in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. Maria had retreated to her room early, claiming a headache, leaving the rest of us to deal with the lingering awkwardness. Hugo and Kyle were in the living room, discussing trip logistics, while Jack had excused himself for the night. I was alone with my thoughts when I noticed a folded piece of paper on the counter, partially hidden under a stack of mail. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up. It was a letter addressed to Jack, written in Maria's unmistakable handwriting. At first, I hesitated, knowing it wasn't meant for me. But the mention of Hugo's name in the opening lines drew me in, and I couldn't stop myself from reading further. As my eyes scanned the words, my stomach dropped. The letter revealed Maria's plan to exclude Hugo from her will, blaming me for their strained relationship. She lavished praise on Jack, calling him the son she wished she had, and outlining her intention to leave him everything: her house, her savings, even her small business. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. It wasn't just the contents of the letter that shocked me, it was the calculated malice behind it. Maria hadn't simply excluded Hugo, she had gone out of her way to erase him from her life, all because of her resentment toward me. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket, my mind racing. I knew I had to tell Hugo, but I also wanted Maria to face the consequences of her actions. She had spent years undermining me, and now she was trying to hurt Hugo in the process. Enough was enough. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to confront the situation head-on. Hugo was still asleep, so I took the opportunity to gather my thoughts. By the time he joined me in the kitchen, I had made up my mind. "Good morning," he said, kissing me on the forehead. "You're up early." "Hugo, we need to talk," I replied, my tone serious. He frowned, sensing the gravity of my words. "What's wrong?" I pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. "I found this last night. It's from your mother to Jack. You need to read it." He unfolded the paper and began to read, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to anger. When he finished, he set the letter down on the table and ran a hand through his hair. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice trembling. "She really wrote this?" "She did," I confirmed, "and I think we need to address it before the trip." Hugo nodded, his jaw set. "You're right. We can't let this slide." That evening, we called a family meeting in the living room. Maria was noticeably annoyed, but she joined us nonetheless, her expression icy. Kyle and Jack looked uneasy, sensing the tension in the air. "What's this about?" Maria asked, her tone clipped. Hugo stood up, holding the letter in his hand. "Mom, I found this," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Care to explain?" Maria's eyes widened as she recognized the letter. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked, but her expression quickly morphed into one of defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, crossing her arms. "That's private. You had no right to read it." "Private?" Hugo shot back. "You're plotting to disinherit me and give everything to Jack. How is that private?" Kyle, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Maria, is this true? Did you write that letter?" Maria hesitated, her facade cracking. "I was upset," she admitted. "I didn't mean any of it." "That's a lie," I interjected. "The letter is detailed and thought out. You knew exactly what you were doing." Jack looked horrified, his gaze darting between Maria and Hugo. "I didn't know about this," he said quickly. "I swear, I believe you," Hugo replied. "But this changes everything." The confrontation continued for over an hour, with Maria growing increasingly defensive and Hugo refusing to back down. By the end of it, Maria was left speechless, her usual manipulative tactics failing her for once. Hugo made it clear that unless she changed her behavior, their relationship would be permanently damaged. As the meeting broke up, Hugo turned to me and said, "Thank you for standing by me. I don't know how I would have handled this without you." I squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of hope. For the first time, it felt like we were truly united against the toxicity that had plagued our lives for so long. But I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Maria still had a lot to answer for, and the trip to Hawaii loomed on the horizon like a storm cloud. The morning of the Hawaii trip, the house was eerily quiet. Maria had retreated to her room the night before, after our explosive confrontation, and hadn't emerged since. Hugo, Kyle, and I loaded our bags into the car, ready to leave for the airport. Jack had already left, visibly shaken by the revelations and unsure of his place in the family dynamic. As we prepared to drive off, Hugo hesitated. "Should we tell her we're leaving?" he asked, glancing back at the house. "No," I said firmly. "She made her choices. Let her deal with the consequences." We arrived at the airport with a sense of relief, knowing we were leaving Maria and her toxicity behind, at least temporarily. As we waited to board, Hugo pulled me aside. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "This trip isn't just about getting away. It's about starting fresh. I'm done letting my mother control our lives." I smiled, a weight lifting from my chest. Me too. The flight to Hawaii felt like the beginning of something new. We spent the next few days soaking up the sun, exploring the island, and reconnecting as a family, without Maria's shadow looming over us. It was a glimpse of what life could be like if we truly broke free from her grasp. Back at home, Maria was not taking the situation well. She left me a barrage of voicemails, ranging from tearful apologies to angry accusations. Hugo received similar messages, but he ignored them, focusing instead on strengthening his relationships with Kyle and Jack. A week after we returned, Maria showed up at our door unannounced. She looked disheveled, her usual polished appearance replaced by desperation. "Hugo, please," she begged. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Hugo crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "It's not that simple, Mom. You've caused a lot of pain, and it's going to take time to rebuild trust." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do." Over the next few months, Maria attempted to repair the damage she'd done. She apologized to me multiple times, each one seemingly more genuine than the last. Hugo remained cautious, but allowed her to slowly re-enter his life under strict boundaries. Jack, too, distanced himself from Maria, recognizing how his enabling behavior had contributed to the problem. As for me, I found peace in the newfound stability of our family. I forgave Maria, not for her sake, but for mine. Holding on to resentment only gave her more power over me, and I was done letting her dictate my emotions. Today, our lives look very different. Hugo and I have built a home filled with love and respect, a stark contrast to the chaos Maria once brought. She remains a part of our lives, but on our terms. The Hawaii trip was the turning point, a reminder that sometimes you have to walk away from toxicity to find happiness. Maria's relationships with us are still strained, but she's working to mend them. Whether she succeeds or not, I know one thing for certain: we're stronger now because we chose each other over the dysfunction she created. And that's a victory I'll always cherish.